Okay, we're at the bottom of page 17. He says, second, why we also consider it shameful for a man to be seduced by money or political power, either because he cringes at ill treatment and will not endure it, or because he has tasted the benefits of wealth and power, he will not rise above them. None of these benefits is stable or permanent, apart from the fact that no genuine affection can possibly be based upon them. Now, what he has said is exactly consistent with complete friendship. Because when you want wealth or power, it's not affection for other human beings or affection toward you. It's desiring those objects. And they are not stable or permanent. Wealth, power, they come and go. There's a certain irony here. He is perfectly correct. However, this man is a politician, and he's wealthy, and these seems to be the exact things that he actually pursues in his real life, despite that in his moralizing eulogy, he says that these are not the highest things. He says, our customs then provide for only one honorable way of taking a man as a lover, in addition to recognizing that the lover's total and willing subjugation to his beloved's wishes is neither servile nor reprehensible. We will allow that there is one, and only one, further reason for willingly subjecting oneself to another, which is equally above reproach. This is the subjugation for the sake of virtue. So, we will not subjugate ourselves for wealth. We will not subjugate ourselves for power. That's base. That's ignoble. But being subservient for love that results in virtue, which is going to be wisdom, he says is acceptable. But notice this, subjugation. This is a form of slavery, right? The lover, this is the older man, is going to subjugate himself to the wishes of his beloved, the younger man, for the sake of virtue, right? First of all, the older man is not the one who's going to get the virtue from younger man. He even acknowledges that. It's the younger man who gets the virtue from the older man, precisely because the older man's the one with the experience and the knowledge. The younger person is in need of guidance. Remember, love provides guidance toward happiness. Second of all, can you really have love in the context of subjugation? Subjugation is compulsion. Subjugation is force. Subjugation is servitude and slavery, right? The next thing is this. Is really an older man going to subjugate himself to a younger man? I think in reality it's going to be the opposite. That the older man is going to have the wherewithal to subjugate the younger man. Right? If someone decides to put himself at another's disposal, because he thinks that he will make him better in wisdom or in any other part of virtue, we approve of this voluntary subjugation, servitude. We consider it neither shameful nor servile. Well, how can servile behavior not be servile? That's an oxymoron. Yes, we might allow ourselves to come under the authority of another person for the sake of virtue, but we're not going to do it in a servile way. We're not going to give up our humanity. We're still going to remain free. We're just going to be willing to accept the authority of the other person. That's not the same thing. So he says, acting in a servile way, in a form of subjugation, is not servile. Well, that's an oxymoron. That's just not true. And furthermore, this older man is never going to subjugate himself in this way. This is the practical reality of things. Both these principles, that is, both the principle governing the proper attitude toward the lover of young men and the principle governing the love of wisdom and of virtue in general, must be combined if a young man is to accept a lover in an honorable way. Well, wait a second. We've just seen the two objects of love involved in this exchange. Love of a young man and love of wisdom. The old man is in it for what? He's not going to get wisdom from the young man. He loves young men. And what does he love about them? Their youth, their beauty, the bloom of their youth, and sex. And Who is the true lover of wisdom? It's the young boy who thinks he's going to get wisdom from this deal, right? And who's nobler? Clearly, at least the one who thinks that they're going to get wisdom, even though they get deceived, right? Now here it starts to get really good. Let's go forward one page. I'm a little behind there. He says, when an older lover and a young man come together and each obeys the principle appropriate to him. Now, what is the principle appropriate to him? Apparently, the principle of the lover is to do whatever he can to get the beloved, and the beloved is supposed to resist, right? Because that's how you separate the wheat from the chaff, right? But if someone's deceiving you, your resistance is going to be undermined potentially. When they each obeys the principle appropriate to him, when the lover realizes that he is justified in doing anything for a loved one who grants him favors. Is anyone justified in doing anything? Now come on, folks. Obviously not. And when he says anything, he says anything. The lover cannot be justified, even though he said the gods justify even breaking his vows. One day the lover says, I love you, and he gets what he wants, and then the next day after he's gotten it, he says, sorry, don't love you anymore. Right? That's what he says is justified. That can't be right. Or a loved one who grants him favors. Now wait a second. The loved one is not supposed to grant the favors. In fact, it's the lover who's supposed to do stuff for the beloved because they're pursuing them. But now he's flipped it on its head. You have to be, this is how sneaky Pausanias is. This is how well crafted this speech is. He does these flips where he presents it one way and it makes sense and it actually seems legitimate, but then he flips it around the other way. So here he's saying, or the loved one, that's the beloved, who grants favors to the lover. And when the young man understands that he is justified in performing any service for a lover who can make him wise and virtuous, the young man is going to perform any service for the older man to make him wise and virtuous. Come on, folks. Your bullshit detector should be going on right now. Do you see what this is? Do you see what this is? It's a kind of a form of prostitution. What's the real relationship that's happening? Let's take Pausanias, because he's describing himself. Pausanias is an older man, a man of wealth and power politically. He comes to the younger man, and maybe he does it in a subtle way, in a not overt way. He basically says, you're young, you're beautiful, I want you. And, then he says, you know what, I can offer something to you. You give your body to me, and I will offer wealth and power to you. What is that called? It's called prostitution, effectively, is what he's describing here. Right? The chances of this young man getting wisdom out of this relationship are rather slim. And he has just said that the young man should be performing any service to the lover. Well, he's just flipped it. He initially said that it's the lover, the older man, can do whatever he wants in pursuing his case, but that the younger person, the beloved, should be resistant at every turn to try to determine whether this person really loves them, right? Which is the principle of, you don't sleep with the person on the first date. You wait around and see if they're still interested then, right? And any service, well, that has an erotic connotation. And when the lover is able to help the young man become wiser and better, and the young man is eager to be taught and improved by his lover, then and only then, when these two principles coincide absolutely, it is ever honorable for a young man to accept. Well, what are the principles? Do you get it? What are the two principles as he's established it? The lover can do whatever he wants to get the younger man. And the beloved apparently should perform any service as a sign of love and respect for what the older man is doing. That sounds silly. Only in this case, we should notice, it is never shameful to be deceived. It is never shameful to be deceived? Well, first of all, who's the one who's good? It gets worse, folks. You see, this is the real kicker here. It is never shameful to be deceived. Well, who's going to be deceived? It's not going to be the older guy, right? It's going to be the younger one. In every other case, it is shameful, both for the deceiver and the person he deceives. So notice, this is Book 9 of the Ethics, on deception and self-deception. In every other case, it is shameful, both for the deceiver and the one he deceives. But here he seems to be saying, if someone is deceived, or actually is the perpetrator of the deception, that it's not shameful. And to say it's not shameful is to say that it's okay. Well, what have his rules, such as they are, permitted? The rules have now permitted that the lover can deceive the younger man to get what he wants. Right? He said that they can do whatever they want. Suppose, for example, that someone thinks his lover is rich and accepts him for his money, and his actions won't be any less shameful if it turns out that he was deceived and his lover was a poor man after all. Right? So now you see that the young man is not after wisdom, he's after the guy's money, and he's willing to have sex with him for his money. And everything that's said here is played out, not of course in these particular terms, but this issue of Aristotle in Book 9 speaks of the person who thinks they're being loved for their character and turns out to be loved for some type of utility. He says, suppose, for example, that someone thinks his lover is rich and accepts him for his money, his action won't be any less shameful. Well, that's just not true, because he's supposed to be after wisdom. That's what the pursuit of wisdom is, exactly what he claims make this relationship heavenly and dignified to begin with, right? You have to remember what he said in the past to appreciate what he's saying now and compare them. It's the only way you're going to see this. He won't have done anything shameful if it turns out that he was deceived and his lover was poor. So here you see the person deceived was the young man, was poor after all. For the young man has already shown himself to be the sort of person who will do anything for money. So my daughter is keeping things interesting down here. So for the young man has already shown himself to be the sort of person who will do anything for money. Anything. Sleep with someone for money. That sounds plausible to me. And he is far from honorable. And what has he just said justified? If the young man comes seeking money, then it's okay to do whatever you want with him. That's effectively what he's just said. He's coming in trying to deceive you, saying he's there for wisdom, but he really wants your money, and you turn out to be poor. Right? So, he says, by the same token, suppose that someone takes a lover in the mistaken belief that the lover is a good man and likely to make him better himself, while in reality the man is horrible. Notice that. By the same token, suppose that someone takes a lover, right? Who takes a lover? A beloved takes a lover. The beloved is the one being deceived here. The beloved takes a lover in the mistaken belief that the lover, that's the older man, is good and likely to make him better himself. That's the ideal of this relationship. While in reality, the man is horrible, totally lacking in virtue. Even so, get this, even so, it is noble for him to have been deceived. So get this, folks. Pausanias is telling us that the younger man goes into it honestly for virtue, and you only get virtue and wisdom from being someone of good character. And then he's deceived by a horrible man, because what does a horrible person do? They deceive you. That's their business, right? He says it's noble that the young man has been deceived. What has he just done? He has just done the very thing that he claimed to want to make laws to prohibit at the beginning of this speech. And this is why, at the end of his speech, Aristophanes has hiccups. He can't speak because he has seen the hypocrisy here. It's noble for the young man to be deceived by the older man when he thought he was going to get virtue, and instead he got left behind. For he too has demonstrated something of himself, that he is the sort of person who will do anything for the sake of virtue. All this stuff about doing anything, performing any deed, you cannot possibly do anything and be virtuous. You have to do a specific thing, and you have to do it in the right way. He said that himself. His own logic undermines what he's saying. You can't do anything for the sake of virtue, because if you do anything, it's by definition, many things are not going to be virtuous, right? And what could be more honorable than that? It follows, therefore, that giving in to your lover, notice he now says, giving in to your lover. Excuse me, he had told us that the beloved is not to give in to their lover. They're supposed to resist, and that the rules promote them to resist, so that they can separate, as he says, the wheat from the chaff. And now he's telling us that it's virtuous, quote unquote, for the beloved to give in to the requests of the lover. A total role reversal. And what could be more honorable than that? It follows, therefore, that giving into your lover for virtue's sake is honorable. It's just the opposite, actually. Whatever the outcome. Well, not every outcome is honorable. That's just absurd. Anybody can see that on its face. You can see this man has had a lot of practice deceiving young boys, because this is the kind of exact rhetoric he uses to fleece them into getting what he wants from them, right? And this, of course, is the heavenly love. Now that must be the line. He said all this stuff about deceiving young men to get them in bed, and then he calls it heavenly love, and that must be the thing that makes Aristophanes start to hiccup, meaning like he cannot believe what he's hearing with his ears, because he sees right through it, right? And of course, the first time you read this, you're not going to see through it at all. It requires a lot of careful reading. And if you didn't get every last thing I've said here, I think you have started to see some of the hypocrisy here. And why do I get into it? There's two reasons. He actually explains the mechanics of courtship and why they're there in precise detail, on the one hand. And that is important to really see how the moral rules of love and sex, why they're there and how they function in terms of our interactions. It's also important to just, like, there's such a human element to this speech when you really see what he's talking about. He's describing stuff we're familiar with, despite the fact his name is Pausanias and he's in a book from 2,500 years ago. Like, this is stuff we live with and either have some vague first-hand experience, or we've seen it portrayed or seen it played out in the lives of other people. He says, and this, of course, is heavenly love of the heavenly goddess. Love's value to the city as a whole and to the citizen is immeasurable, for he compels the lover and his loved one alike to make virtue their central concern. All other forms of love belong to the vulgar goddess. Right? So, what he's really doing is like saying black is white and white is black. He's like recoding the whole moral matrix of the world to benefit him, which is exactly what politicians attempt to do. Their will to power, right? He says day is night and night is day, right? And with that, I will conclude, and we will move on to Aristophanes' speech in the next lecture.